I said I was going to be talking to you about some different things and an offer coming up on the YouTube site. So we're on the YouTube site. But first I want to talk a little bit about the whole thing with Tombstone versus, and I hate that word really, but it was a VS, now it's just a V. Tombstone versus Wyatt Earp debacle. I used to be debacle or the whole thing. All right, and they're both good movies. It is apples and oranges. One tells pretty much the whole story, or attempts to, and the other one has an isolated portion of his life at the OK Corral with his brothers, and of course with Doc Holliday. And then you have the whole thing with Dennis Quaid's Doc Holliday and Val Kilmer, and they both give great performances. Let's face it, they really do. Very different performances, approached differently. With Quaid is more physical, and Kilmer's is more verbal. And of course, Kilmer's the way it's shot, the way it's produced, which basically he and Russell had the most power over. It shows, and the camera loves them because of it. They're two good films, and it'll be interesting as we go down the road, see how history treats both of them. But most people do prefer Tombstone simply because of the way it's shot and the way it's written. But they're both legitimate. They're both good films. One, as it says in my opinion in my blog, is the one is very, very visual, stunning visually, and the other one is very action-packed. So it depends on your where you're going for your substance. Of course, I do prefer the Tombstone because of the way it's edited, the way it's shot. And according to some people who were there on the when it was being put together as a package for Costner, and then later on when it was being filmed and directed to begin with, it was going to be more like a Ford film, where you set the camera and let the action in front tell the story. And I'm told by people who were there and were in the film that both Kilmer and Russell got together and said, "Hey, wait a minute. We this is not the way we should do it." And through some politicking and so forth, they got control of the film and did it the way we see it today, and it works. And of course, Costner has his vision, which in his westerns is a little more slow moving and a little more evolving and so forth, and you eventually get to where you're going, but it takes a while, and that wasn't the case with Tombstone. You were there. So that's those two films, and if you go to my hub page site, you'll see a little bit more of the review that you got a little glimpse of on Facebook and some of these other sites, and I've added a little bit more to it. For example, I've put on a interview that a little snippet of an interview that John Ford did with Henry Fonda years after they did My Darling Clementine together, and he talks about Wyatt Earp telling the story of the OK Corral to Harry Carey Sr., and it's very fascinating that he said he filmed it exactly the way it was told by Wyatt Earp to Harry Carey Sr. And if that's the case, well, there's a lot of legend that went into that telling. And it was actually on, he said he sketched it out. I'd love to see that sketch. If it does exist, that'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? So anyway, there's that. Now, the museum this weekend. Scottsdale Museum of the West like I say, a little fanfare, Scottsdale. We're going to be talking about the rise and decline of the TV Western. And they were very popular. Of course, we had the early ones, the Lone Ranger, Hoppy, Gene, Roy, Hey Cisco, we had them all. And then in 1955, the Westerns started to grow up. That's when the movie studios decided, well, you can't beat them, so let's join them. And Warner Brothers and these other studios, they started taking a little bit of interest in producing some westerns for television. Review, which was part of Universal, and they started doing westerns with a little bit more of an adult tone, like Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, which we'll talk about at great length at the museum. Gunsmoke, based on the radio show Gunsmoke with William Conrad, who he played Cannon on TV. And then Cheyenne, which was revolving on Warner Brother Presents with two other shows that were televised versions of Warner Brothers movies, which were Kings Row and Casablanca, which they didn't last, and Cheyenne did. And this went on. By 1959, there were 26 westerns, 3 networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS. Hard to believe now with the hundreds of stations we have to choose from, but back then you had, well, let's see, what shall we watch tonight? NBC, CBS, or ABC, whatever. And then you had the independent station, which ran local programming, and PBS back then, which was it was educational. You could watch the Life of a Moth or something, which some people found fascinating. I know I did. And you could watch it without commercials. It was free, so you could watch that whole moth evolving from whatever to a moth, fly away. It was wonderful. And it made me cry. I laughed, I cried. It was wonderful. I have the whole collection of the different moths. I digress here. So, 26 westerns, and then we went into the 60s, and they were still going strong. Warner Brothers Review at Universal Studios, or Universal City, with Robert Fuller and John Smith and Laramie, and there was the Virginian. A lot of stuff coming out of there. And then about 66, 67, bam! I mean, bam! Demographics came in. They had been there, but the studios, stations, the networks, they looked at these things called demographics and said, hey, these westerns and these comedies and variety shows, like Red Skelton and Ed Sullivan, they're appealing to an audience we don't want anymore. They're an older audience, and we got to get rid of them. And the westerns were included in that. At the same time, the PTA came in and said, too much violence in the westerns. Why can't we have more like we did back in the early 50s with Hoppy and Gene and Roy and so forth, where, you shoot and the person gets up and walks away or whatever. So they wanted to tame the westerns down, and I'm simplifying things here. I'm simplifying things, and I won't simplify them so much at the museum on Saturday. But the westerns started declining as far as the ratings go, but also because of the pressure put on them by the PTA, and because of the demographics, the networks wanted to pull these shows. The Rural Purge is what it was called. They started pulling these westerns, and they started making westerns like High Chaparral, which definitely, was a pretty rough western. It was one of the last great westerns of that era, and still, to me, it was one of the great TV westerns. Always will be. And the command went down that, according to people that were on the show, Don Collier and Rudy Ramos and so forth, said, okay, when you shoot this person, the camera needs to stay on them long enough to show that they were only wounded and they're going to get up and everything's peachy keen. And the ratings went down, and as they got ready for their 5th season, word came down there won't be a 5th season, and the plug was pulled on High Chaparral, and so ended the last of, the great westerns. Of course, Gunsmoke went on for a few more years, even though it had been canceled in 1967. And a very strong-willed lady decided, no, I don't want Gunsmoke canceled. Happened to be the wife of the president, and they called her Babe. And she was the wife of the president of CBS, and she said, that's my favorite show. You're not going to pull the plug on that show. And they didn't. That's when they brought in Buck Taylor to play Newley, who originally was supposed to be a Swede. They liked Buck so much that they didn't make Newley a Swede. He became Newly O'Brien instead, and that lasted till mid 70s. So there was Gunsmoke, and then you had Bonanza and so forth. They lasted a few more years, and then that was it as far as the time for the westerns that came in the 50s and 60s. So we'll talk about the rural purge and the PTA, the pressure they put on, and why. Of course, you had the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Dr. King at that time. You had the Vietnam War, which was going in, and the protests and the violence at that time. And it was not a good time with all of that going on, and they felt that the westerns and shows like that contributed to it. Of course, Mod Squad was so much better, and I'm guilty of watching that as much as anybody else. And so the westerns declined. So we'll get into that. Now, I also mentioned that I had a special coming up, and I do have it somewhere around here. What I'm going to do, this is so off the cuff, it's a wonderful thing. This is not it, but if you go on my site, silverscreencowboys.com, and order the trade version, which is the paperback version, of Riding the Hollywood Trail 2, just 2, when I send it out to you, I will send along, and this is not it, but it is a jewel box that will include golden nuggets along the Hollywood Trail. And no, that doesn't mean it's road apples from the horses. That's the name of it. Golden Nuggets Along the Hollywood Trail, which is a CD full of stories, little tidbits and trivia that you can just put in your car and listen to as you're going along. It's 50 minutes long. But the neat thing is that you can listen to it over and over and you'll learn something new each time. But that's absolutely free. And that's going to go out to you if you order just a copy of Riding the Hollywood Trail 2, Blazing the Early Television Trail. Now, if you want to order more than one copy, that's fine. Then I'll put in one of these for each copy that you purchase. But it's only for book 2, all right? So you do that, and you will get Golden Nuggets Along the Hollywood Trail to put in and just listen to. It's audio, all right? So that does it for right now. Have a good time. Enjoy your weekend. Hope to see you if you're in the Valley of the Sun at the museum. And we'll talk more. And if you have questions, please look me up on my website or here on YouTube. And we'll talk again. All right, in the meantime, here's my wall of fame here. And not me, but the people who are up here. And from time to time, we'll go through this. And it's like over here, this is not necessarily Western, but here we've got Denny Miller, who was on Wagon Train. He was one of the Tarzans, and he sent me this. Good old Denny, he was a friend of mine, and he's with what's supposed to be an African elephant there. Now, as you know, African elephants, maybe you don't know, were hard to train, so they used Indian elephants, and they put fake ears on them. See my nose hairs and all that? Isn't that great? They put fake ears. So there's fake ears on this elephant. Fake ears to make it look an Indian elephant like an African elephant. And they would do that, but if they do stock footage, it would still be Indian. So you'd see in those old Tarzan movies or Tarzan movies that they would go from African elephants to Indian elephants, long ears, short ears, or what have you. But, time will take you around the room and show you things like that. Denny, of course, had to change his name to Scott Miller on Wagon Train because they said no one manly would be named Denny or have a name that ended in an E, like a Denny, not taking into consideration Johnny Mac Brown or Johnny Weissmiller. So he had to go by Scott Miller, and then when he left that show, he went back to Denny. Great guy, miss him a lot. So there's the special. Go on there on my site, silverscreencowboys.com, and order Riding the Hollywood Trail 2, Blazing the Early Television Trail, and you will get a free CD to pop in the car at home and listen to the tales, tidbits, trivia. A lot of interesting stuff on there. I even put it on and listen to it occasionally. I hate hearing my voice, so I don't do it too often. And then hopefully I'll see you on Saturday. Until next time, right on. Have a good one. Have a good weekend. Bye, bye, bye. Bye bonds or whatever. See you then.